evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Greg Thomas. I'm co-producer of Harlem Speaks, the flagship series of the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. This is our 7th year of bi-weekly interviews with jazz artists and those who are important to jazz and have some type of connection with Harlem in some way or another, but I guess it's impossible to play jazz without having a connection to Harlem, right? In some way or another. But since we're getting a little late start, I am going to hand over the reins to Mr. Dominick Farinacci, who's a great trumpet player and friend of the Jazz Museum in Harlem. He's going to take the honors here.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, on behalf of Loren Schoenberg, Executive Director, and Christian McBride, the Co-Director, I would like to welcome you to the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, specifically our Harlem Speaks series. So we're so thrilled today to have, to me, one of the greatest musical minds in our lifetime here. Composer, band leader, who has so many global musical influences, who's brought them into her own world and has created such a distinguished sound to her music that you could put on a recording of her and know after just a couple notes this is Maria Schneider. And for me personally, someone who has one of the most beautiful concepts of melody, and also, aside from all the musical stuff, is one of the pioneers of getting her music to her audience in a truly innovative way through the artist share. So there's so many things to talk about, and I'd like to welcome 9-time Grammy Award nominee and 2-time Grammy Award winner, Maria Schneider.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to say, of the 9 times, the 7 times they must have got that wrong. So I'm glad they got it right at least 2 times, you know. That's great. So, you know, if you don't mind, I just want to kind of touch on your upcoming performance and then kind of backtrack to your days back in Minnesota growing up and what you were exposed to there. So she has a performance coming up on May 13th at Carnegie Hall. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this it's completely classical. It was the commission originally came from Dawn Upshaw, the soprano. She had come to hear my band on quite a few occasions when we would play at the Jazz Standard. And I think she first heard of my music from Osvaldo Golijov, the Argentine composer. I don't know if any of you know him. And she, at one point, came to me and said, "I'd like you to write something for me." And I was like, "Oh my God, Dawn, I write instrumental music. I've never written for voice outside of some vocalese, Luciano Souza, on my own music. I have never written really for words, and I haven't written for classical orchestra, you know, outside of a few little excerpts and things I did when I was back in college 30 years ago or something." And I just said, "Oh my God, this is too terrifying." And I kind of turned her down, but she kept coming at me with this thing to do with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. And so finally I said yes. And I wrote the piece, and we premiered it in St. Paul 2 years ago. And we did it 3 nights in a row. And now there's this series called Spring for Music, and they invited different chamber orchestras from the United States to maybe Canada too, I'm not sure, to apply to send in programming. They were chosen based on interesting programming and unique programming, and so they threw my piece, and they're also doing Stravinsky and Bartók and Haydn, I believe, on the same program. And so we're doing this thing. So now I have to gear myself up for conducting classical orchestra, and I'm terrified. It's a whole nother animal. We were talking about that.
So this is May of 2011 here, as you're talking about with Dawn Upshaw at Carnegie Hall. Now, if we could kind of backtrack, you have such a wide variety of so many musical influences. Could you bring us back to Minnesota, where you're from, right, and talk a little bit about your childhood, what you were exposed to, you know,
Yeah.
in that time?
Well, I'm from southwest Minnesota, really small town, Windham, Minnesota. Nobody knows it. And it would not be a place where you would be exposed to jazz or really music of too much of any kind, because they didn't even have a record store. They sold records in the clothing store there. But there was a woman who moved to New York, or moved to Windham in 1964. I would say 65, but it was truly 64. And she she had come from Chicago, and she was a classical pianist and also a stride pianist. Do you guys know Dorothy Donegan? So, okay, so she was very much, first of all, she was the age of Dorothy Donegan, and she was part of that scene and that style of playing. And she had that same thing. I used to go hear Dorothy all the time when I first moved to New York. And you know how she would kind of smile at the audience? She had this kind of charm factor that she would do, and then she was just a killer pianist. And Mrs. Butler had that same thing. And so when she moved to Wyndham, my parents heard about her and invited her over for dinner. And she showed up. She walked in the door, and I still remember it. I mean, she had bright red hair. She wore rhinestone-studded glasses, purple muumuus. You know, she would wear slippers that had like feathers on, you know, like little boa slippers. She was so exotic, and at the same time she had a face like Dizzy Gillespie. And I can't really describe how this all fits together, but if you saw a picture of her, you'd say, yes, that's right. And so she came over, and my parents invited her over for dinner, and after dinner she sat down at the piano and played. And me and my two sisters were sitting there, and she played some classical stuff, and then she went into jazz, you know, her stride thing, and she did things where she'd go off the end of the piano and be laughing, and it was just like, you know, I could just feel the joy of music just flying above the piano. It was like, oh my God, I want that, you know. And I had the red hair. My hair was really red back then, and so I said to my mom, I want to be Mrs. Butler. Please, 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 I want to take lessons. And so she let me. And she turned out to be just the most fantastic teacher. And I should tell you why she moved to Wyndham, because you'd be like, okay, if she was so great, why'd she move from Chicago to Wyndham? Her husband and her son both died of cancer within 1 month of each other. And her only living family was a daughter who had married a chiropractor in Wyndham. So she was just devastated, and she just wanted to be near her daughter. So it was this extraordinary talent that, you know, showed up in this little town. Crazy. So her first lesson that she gave me, she played a major triad, and she sang, bright the day, and then she played a minor triad, and she sang, dark the night. And she said, everything in music has a feeling and a sound, and I want you to understand why the music you play sounds the way it sounds. And so we're going to study something called music theory. Little did I know, you know, what I was in for. But she made it fun, though, you know. And she said, you're going to have this music writing notebook, and we're going to study how music works, you know. And so half of every lesson was music theory. And she'd do things like, you know, a 1-4-5 chord, which is tonic, subdominant, dominant. She'd sing, here we go up the hill, back again, home, to show that tonic is home. So the subdominant moves up the hill, a little bit away, and then the dominant brings you back again. You can just feel that it's bringing you back again, home. And so these little things she did, they stuck with me, you know. And if I look at my old music, it's all analyzed. Every single chord, G minor, you know, all my Schubert, Mendelssohn, Beethoven, everything. And then half of every lesson would be playing standards and coming up with little stride arrangements. Every recital I'd do like Jada or something like that, you know, and then I'd do a classical piece. So that's kind of what got my head. The thing that was bizarre, though, is, you know, my parents had some old Teddy Wilson albums and some old Ellington, but like old, you know, like from the 30s. And I knew nothing about the development of jazz. For me, jazz was like something that died, and it was kind of from when Mrs. Butler was young. And I always lamented, I always wished that I had grown up and was as old as Mrs. Butler, so I would have been around when that music was happening, because I felt like, you know, I missed the boat. I missed what was in my feeling of, you know, loving music. So it wasn't until I went to college and I was sitting in my dorm playing music one night, and this kid heard it through the door because I was blasting it, and it was probably Ellington or something. He knocks on the door and he says, you like jazz? And I didn't even call it jazz, you know. It was just this music I liked, you know, and my few little records that I had that was about that many. And he said, I have some records, you know, I could lay some stuff on you, so you can come to my room. So I came to his room. I remember he had this whole shelf of records. And he said, here, try this. And he gave me McCoy Tyner with John Coltrane. So you can imagine, it's like the shock that I'm just about going to go through. And he gave me Herbie Hancock Headhunters. That was too extreme. That was cruel. And there was a third one, and I don't remember the third one. I can't remember what it was. But I remember that those two, like when I put them on, you know, I go back to my room, oh, this is nice, let's see. You know, it was just like, oh my God, you know, I'd never heard piano players playing without some kind of roots and, you know, all these chordal voicings. It's like, what is that? And Coltrane, and so then I just started listening like crazy, going to the record store. On the radio, I heard Bill Evans. I fell in love with it. So I went to the store and I saw that album, Village Vanguard Sessions, the one with, you know, it looks so powerful. I said, okay, that's the record I'm going to get, which I think to this day is the best one of the Bill Evans albums. And then I went back to the E-bin and I found Gil Evans next to Bill Evans and thought they must be related, and so that might be good. I mean, this is how naive I was, all the way starting college. So, you know, I mean, you want me to keep rambling? I can keep going.
This is great. Yeah, great.
So at that time, I was studying classical theory. That was my major. And because even though I played piano, I didn't have in my hands what Mrs. Butler had. I knew I would never be a good pianist. I mean, I was in Wyndham, everybody thought I was good, but, you know, I knew better because I knew what she could do. And I was like, you know, and I also knew in the classical world what people could do too, because there was this little girl that visited Wyndham. I'll never forget, this was like where my life was just destroyed. This family, a very wealthy farm family, they had, you knew they were wealthy because they had the big harvester grain, or what do you call them, grain, or what was that? Silos. Silos. They had the big blue harvester silos, and they had a grand piano in their house, and they had friends from the East that came to visit, and they said that this little girl, you know, she was like my age, that she'd won a Mozart competition. So after dinner, they said, oh, sit down and play your concerto. And she played, and it was so effortless and perfect. Her runs were, I mean, Mozart is so hard to play. And these little runs were just perfect, and she just sat there like a little angel, and I hated her because she just destroyed every hope I ever had, you know. But then after dinner, everybody wanted to do Christmas songs, and I could just sit down and play Christmas, you know, start playing Christmas songs. And then I remember seeing her face, and she was just kind of like, you know, it's like, so I realized, okay, well, there's these different polarities in music that I didn't even really know of, because I grew up with Mrs. Butler, where music was just music, you know? You didn't call it classical and jazz, you didn't call it, it was just these different things, and you analyzed it all the same, and you put it all together, and it was just, that was my feeling about music. So in college, I started studying theory. I wanted to be a composer, but I felt that was way too much to to profess that I want to be a composer was like, you know, yeah, right. You know, so I didn't even tell them that I dreamed of that. But luckily I had a theory teacher that heard some potential in some little theory exercise I did. And she said, you know, you should really be a composer. You have a knack for composing. And I'm like, really? You think so? You know, so I decided, okay. So I started taking composition lessons. And here is where the snag happened, and this hits my paranoia point about this Carnegie Hall thing, is that was in the 1980s. I'm born in 1960. So in the 1980s, the classical world, I started college in 1979. If your music didn't sound completely undecipherable, complex, atonal, I don't want to knock atonal music because there's many wonderful atonal pieces. But if your music wasn't just something really complex, and if it had melody, forget it. You know, people would just roll their eyes at you. And, you know, I found that just to be so depressing. It's like, how the heck how am I supposed to write music that I don't like? You know, I mean, where, I didn't get that concept, you know? And okay, some people like that, but I don't like it. And so you're going to tell me, no, you have to write this way because this is what's new and fresh. You know, so I was really, really frustrated with that. Very paranoid about classical people, and I still am, you know, and that was one of the reasons I didn't want to write for Dawn. It's like, you people scare me, you know, and so luckily my classical composition teacher, who had been a student of Hindemith, and he said to me, you know, your music is sounding so influenced by jazz. He said, you know, there's a big band at the school, and I really suggest you just go and listen to the big band, and maybe you can write something for it. Talk to Dr. Frank Ben-Cresciuto, who's leading the band, and maybe he'll let you write for the band. And so I thought, wow, I thought that was a great idea. And I didn't even know there was jazz at the school, you know. There was no jazz program. It was the University of Minnesota, but they had this band. So I went and just started watching the band play. And I'd get copies of the score, and they were doing Thad Jones, and they were doing just all sorts of stuff. And I would watch the score go by, and they did Bob Brookmeyer music, and just, you know, all the big band composers that a lot of colleges were playing. And so I started writing for the band. I took some lessons from a guy playing lead alto. He was just a kid too, but his name was Bob Parsons. And he gave me a few lessons, and I just started figuring out my way. And then there was a teacher at the school, Reginald Buckner, and he since died, but he really took me under his wing as a jazz pianist, and he started giving me lessons. And then I studied with this man, Manfredo Fest, who was a Brazilian pianist, blind Brazilian pianist, wonderful, wonderful player, and he now has died too. And that's kind of how it started, you know, and I just started moving over to the jazz world, and they liked melody and tonal harmony, you know, they loved it. And at the same time, you know, there was room in jazz for all sorts of eccentricities and free things and whatever, but everything was welcome. And I love that, you know, and so and then I started just listening like crazy to, you know, I fell in love with Mingus, and I fell in love with Gil Evans, and, you know, there were just so many composers, and Bob Brookmeyer and Thad Jones, and, you know, all these things. I just started taking them in and incorporating that in with the classical stuff that I knew, and it became this big hodgepodge, and, you know, that's how I started.
So you mentioned Gil Evans, Gil and Bill, who were brothers, right?
Yes, yes, cousins.
So you mentioned, yeah, Gil Evans and Bob Brookmeyer. So you were exposed to their music, and then later on, was it when you were in Eastman that you met Bob Brookmeyer?
No, what happened was, well, I loved both of them, and sorry. I wanted to study after. I went to University of Minnesota. I finished my degree. Then I went to University of Miami for a short time. Where I really wanted to go was Eastman, and I didn't get in at the first shot. So I applied again a semester later, and they let me in. So because they had written to me, you really don't have enough experience. So in 6 months, I got tons of experience. I wrote my butt off. I was like, damn it, they're gonna eat their words, you know. It's like, I'm one of these people where I'm like really friendly, but if you say I can't do something that I think I can do, oh, look out, you know. So anyway, so I got into Eastman, and I loved it, and it was mostly Gil's music I was really deeply into, and I really, really wanted to maybe study with him. I knew nothing about him as a person, but I will tell you, years before I had this experience, and I still remember it. At the time, I didn't know that it was such a powerful thing, but it was powerful enough that I didn't forget it. You know how you have snapshots in your life that you look back and you go, oh yeah, I remember that. So this snapshot was this. I was sitting on the couch in my cheesy little dorm room, or no, apartment at that point, and I was listening to Svengali, and I was looking at the Priestess album. There's a picture of Gil with an umbrella kind of falling from the air, and you know, these are his later albums, so they're very modern, you know, Gil Evans. And I remember having this, I don't want to call it a fantasy because it wasn't anything I could have possibly dreamed to be possible, but it was like I saw myself being kind of like an apprentice with him. I saw myself working for him. And at the time, you know how you have kind of, do you ever, when you watch, maybe I'm just weird, but do you ever have just kind of sort of waking dreams or fantasies? And they're not voluntary, it's not like a wish, but all of a sudden you find yourself fantasizing about this little thing. It was like that. You know, I don't know why it came in my mind, but it did. So a few years later, I'm at Eastman and I wanted to study. I had it in my head, I want to meet Gil Evans, I want to move to New York, and I want to take lessons. Well, my teacher told me, he said, you can't do that. Gil Evans is a total pothead. He won't want to talk with you. He's a recluse, all this stuff. Mind you, he didn't know him, so he didn't really, but I thought he did. So I decided not to listen to that. So I decided one night, there was something called a National Endowment apprenticeship grant. They don't have them anymore, but you could get a National Endowment grant to study with somebody. And I wanted to do it with Gil. So I went down to the, you know, back then nobody had cell phones or anything. We didn't have phones in our dorm. It was just one little wooden phone booth at the end of the hallway. So I went down to the end of the hallway, dialed on the phone, you know, what was it, 212-555-1212 on the phone. Do you have a number for Gil Evans? Yes, we do. And they gave me the number. I'm like, holy crap. I had the number for Gil Evans on this piece of paper. It was like, oh my God, okay, I'm going to call him now. I'm going to call him. So it was just like, so I go through and I dial the whole number. And I get this recording on the other end of the line. It says, if you wish to speak to Gil or Miles, speak after the beep. And I was like, oh my God, you know, and I hung up the phone. I was like, oh my God, this is just way too heavy. I can't do this. It's totally out of my league. Well, it turned out it was Miles Evans' son. It wasn't Gil Evans. It was Miles sort of talking like Miles, you know. And so I found that out later. But at the time, I was completely intimidated. So then I thought, okay, the other composer I really, really loved was Bob Brookmeyer. And so I thought, well, I would love to study with Bob too. And he's more into, it seemed, you know, the idea of teaching and all. And so I called up Bob Brookmeyer, and he was intimidating too. I mean, the first thing he said to me is, you want to study with me? What's your burn? And I'm like, what's my burn? I don't know. What is a burn? And he was just really intense, you know, and finally I sent him a tape and he agreed to teach me. So that was great. So the way I finally met Gil was I moved to New York. It was August of 1985, and I started working in a music copying office. This is before, you don't even remember this.
Before
People, yes.
Were you using Sibelius back then?
I don't use Sibelius now, honey.
Good.
I use pen and ink.
Yeah.
You know, the Pelican Graphos pen where you use the little ink well back in those days. And that's how I made my living. For 8 years, I sat in an office with a bunch of really jaded composers or arrangers that were kind of jaded, that they weren't, you know, the ones composing the music that we were copying, you know. And there was one guy in there that had copied Sebesky's music for years. Sebesky charts are so hard to read. They're really hard to read. And this guy had lost an eye, you know, and I was just like, oh my God, is this going to happen to me? You know, it was just, he was such a sweet man, and I thought, I don't know how long I can do this, but I did it, and it was great. We copied a lot of really great composers, you know, the kind of composers that can really shoot the stuff out fast, like Torrey Zito, and, you know, that were doing things for the Tony Awards and all this stuff. And one day I was working the Xerox machine in that office, and this guy Tom Pearson came in, who had a band in New York, and but he brought in this big classical score, and I was so starved for musical conversation, you know, something other than, yeah, this guy sucks, you know, whatever people were. So he and I got together for coffee because I was going out for a break, and we left together, and he said, well, who's your favorite composers? And I'm like, oh God, I love Gil Evans. And I said, do you know Gil Evans? He said, yeah, I know Gil Evans. I said, I love Gil Evans. I love this and this and this. And I went into all the details of what it is that I love about Gil Evans. And he said, I said, what do you like? He said, well, I really love Penderecki, and there's a concert on the weekend. You want to go see it? I said, sure, you know. So we exchanged numbers. And then he called me that night and he said, well, I didn't tell you today, but Gil is my best friend. And he needs somebody to work for him and he wants to meet you. I told him all about you. And I was like, oh my God, you know, it's like, what are the chances? And then I remembered, you know, the sitting that night, you know, and I was like, this is too weird. It just gave me chills. And I worked with Gil then for 3 years until he died in '85. So, and that was a really great opportunity. And, you know, it turned out that he did smoke a bit of pot. And he was not one to talk about how you do things, you know. The way I learned from him, in the beginning, he first just had me copying music. Then he started asking me to transcribe music. And then he started having me reorchestrate things, because his stuff that was for a smaller size band, suddenly he was being asked to write or play with radio big bands in Europe. So he needed the stuff to be written for the full big band instrumentation. So he asked me to do it for him, which was just intimidating as all hell. And as it is, it should have been more intimidating than it was, because I did not know what I was doing and I did not belong doing that job. I look at the work I did now and it wasn't very good. He gave me a gift, a big gift, in letting me work with him. I was way out of my, anybody's out of their league next to Gil Evans when it comes to orchestration. They're just, orchestration, Gil has it. It's just, you know, I'm sorry. So I, one day I reorchestrated this thing. It was on a piece called Waltz. It was from Time of the Barracudas. And it was a passage that went from one note and then fanned out into a big fat sonority. So like ba-do-do-do-do-do-da-ba-do-da, it's kind of like that, you know. And so I did it the way we learned at the Eastman School of Music, where you learn to do those things properly. And you know, so that, you know, trumpet's going up and the trombone's going down and the sax is filling out in between, nice big sonority. Gil saw it, and the repulsion in his face, he literally screamed in disgust at what I had done. And he was just like, no, no. And I'm like, I was so confused. It's like, what could be wrong? This is perfect textbook writing. And he said, Maria, I want some of the high instruments going to the bottom of their range really low. And I want some of the low instruments going to the top. So at the end, it feels like they're all struggling. Which, you know, in school you learn to put everybody in their proper range, you know, so they all sound good. And here all of a sudden is somebody that is thinking of sound in a whole nother way. You know, he wants struggle, so he has to put the notes that make the player sound like they're struggling. I mean, at that point is where I said, okay, now I get it. This is, what makes Gil great is Gil, and Gil has studied being Gil his whole life. Bob Brookmeyer has studied being Bob his whole life with no apologies about it, and Ellington and the whole lot of them are the same way. And I realized, how do you learn? It's like you got to start your own group. You have to find yourself, you have to be diligent about it and find your own way, and realize that you have something in you too. The only difference is that you just haven't maybe worked hard enough or been diligent enough to develop it to the same extreme degree. You know, it isn't that suddenly that I should now orchestrate like what Gil just told me. No, it's I have to be that sure about everything that I'm doing for my own reasons and my own set of values and my own sound. It's a great lesson.
Well, one thing that's very special to me about Gil Evans' music is his relationship to the artists he was working with, particularly Miles Davis, Sketches of Spain, among other recordings. But it just sounds like the way he orchestrated things, there's nobody else but Miles who could have played that. It just fits so perfectly. And one of the things I love about your music, as I mentioned to you before, is that it sounds like you write particularly for a specific voice, a specific individual in mind. So your arrangements are such that just any tenor saxophone player wouldn't necessarily fit into it. It has to be Rich Perry if it's this song, or something on that Ingrid Jensen played. Your music is so tailor-made to the performers.
Yeah, it's partly just, you know, when you work with people for so long, you hear them and you almost can't help but write for them, you know. But it's amazing. I mean, now, you know, I know so much more about Gil's music now, long after he died, and it just, one of the big regrets of mine is that I just didn't ask him more questions. I didn't want to be a pain in the butt, you know. And he used to say to me, we'd finish working, he'd say, "You're always in such a hurry to leave. Sit down, let's listen to some music together." And I always felt like I just wanted to help him and get out of his way, you know. And maybe that is partly why he liked working with me, because I wasn't a pain in the butt, you know. I helped him and got out of the way, but I could have asked more. But some of the things I've noticed to that end, like, I wish I had a tape of it here, or I don't know, maybe you have it on your iPod. Do you have Concerto de Aranjuez on your iPod?
Let me check.
Because it's really interesting. The beginning of that piece is a perfect example of what he was just talking about. It starts, you know, with the harp going and the castanets going, you know, and then you hear a flute and, I don't know, French horn. Do you have it?
No, I have a couple others.
Does anybody have Concerto de Aranjuez on an iPod?
Not with me.
Not with you? Okay, well, you can go home and listen to it, but what you'll hear is, you know, there's this fluttering on the beginning, and then you hear in three voices, you're da-da-da, and this is going da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da-da-da, da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-dee-da. And somebody's got it? Oh, awesome. Okay. So then,
Does everyone know what piece she's talking about? Maybe you could just explain.
it's a Rodrigo's Concerto de Aranjuez, which is what's really interesting is listen to the original classic. I mean, when people talk about Gil Evans, they say, what is Gil Evans? People always say, oh, the voicings, you know. It is not the voicings, it is the lines. And because the lines are creating the voicings. And so it's not, he never just writes a voicing by itself. I mean, sometimes, but it's this convergence of lines. So what he does here is he has this stuff going on, and Miles is not playing yet. Then you'll hear some low tuba coming in, going up. And that's the other thing, is like the tuba is never relegated just to roots and bass notes. They're always playing a melody of some sort. So that's moving up and in very odd, uncomfortable rhythms, like slow quintuplets and things going over the bar, so it sounds like it's off, but it's actually very intricately planned to sound like it's off. And all this stuff is going on, and then all of a sudden, when Miles comes in, now there's one mistake, because the castanets was supposed to cut off a few beats before he did, and it makes me so mad when I hear that he blew that. Because what happens is, the moment that Miles comes in, all this motion completely stops, and there's suddenly just a sonority with no vibrato, just like that, so that when Miles comes in, every nuance in his tone, the vibration, any vibrato, anything it's like putting that light on it. It's just like, you know, it's like a beacon on Miles, because there's been all this stuff and then it just peels away. It's like, it'd be like if, you know, all of a sudden, you know, just the most gorgeous woman on the planet just walked in that door and you put that light on her, and our heads, everybody would just be like, who is that? You know, it's like that. That's what he did with Miles. I mean, Miles was amazing, the end all, and how lucky he was to have somebody like Gil write for him. So let's just listen to the beginning of this. It's not working.
Yeah, we can't get the.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? Everybody can kind of check that.
You can hear it from the phone, correct?
No, it's on my MP3 player.
Oh.
I have a couple others of that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The thing is, too, if you listen to the original Rodrigo, and then you compare it to Gil's version, you'll hear all these lines that he added, especially on the bottom. And when you do that comparison, then you really hear what is the essence of Gil Evans. You know, it's powerful, powerful stuff. I have to say, you know.
Well, would you mind, could we listen to one of your pieces?
Yeah, we can. They're all kind of long. I don't know if you want to just listen to.
Well, do you have a particular one? I know you have your CDs here. I have Sky Blue here. I mean, I love. How about Rich's piece?
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
if you
No,
have
Rich's
another one?
piece is a good one.
Okay,
That's
good.
fine. Yeah, Rich's piece. When I first wrote this, you don't want just a CD? I have that too.
Yeah, I
Oh,
can't-
whichever is easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, the CD is easy because I don't have the cable that goes into the.
Oh, really?
No.
Here you go. It is number. Let's see. I don't know what number it is. Number 3. And this was a piece I just sat at the piano and I just came up with the first idea, and I just heard Rich's sound. It's like he has a very he has. Do you guys know Rich Perry's music? He just has a very, very personal sound, and it was nice to write for him. And this piece has a bit of anything on this album. If anything has touches of Gil Evans in it, the sound, it would be this piece.
Oh, it's on Sky Blue?
Mhm.
Oh, we already had that.
Oh, you already had it. That's right.
The orchestration is so. I mean, on one hand, it kind of sounds, so dense and concentrated, but yet it breathes. It has such clarity.
Well, sort of. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. There's a really great book. If you guys want to read a really great book on art that is so applicable to music, and I was thinking about it just now. It's called The Art Spirit by this man, Robert Henry. It's spelled like Henri, like, with an I, but they say Henry. He was an art teacher of the Ashcan School of Art in New York in the early 1900s, so like end of 1800s, early 1900s. And basically they painted just, real life, but scenes from life, New York life. But he was this fantastic teacher, and this book, The Art Spirit, are his teachings. And one of the things he talks about is background. He said that a background is what you see when you're looking at the foreground. So, and it's very applicable to jazz, because when this piece is unusual in that way, and that's what I was wondering about it. Because normally if you write something and there's a jazz soloist, like it's a piece and all of a sudden there's a soloist, a lot of times writers will really overwrite the background. And it kind of, all of a sudden, what's background and what's foreground? And what he's saying is, if I'm looking at you, now I'm looking at all of you. I see you and I see you guys, and the light is a little bit more over here than here, and you're in focus, and now you're not in focus. So now they're the foreground, you're the background. What the background is what I should be seeing of them when I'm focused on you. So it's kind of hazy. And because if it's in focus and it's of equal importance, suddenly there is no background and foreground. And it's the same thing in music. You have to really decide, what do you want in front? And there are, if you go to like MoMA, there's a, I think it's MoMA that owns a particular Van Gogh painting where the background is very intense and very clear, and it almost feels like the face of the man is kind of like the wallpaper sort of here, and he's kind of sunk back. And I'm sure he was going for that, and this, in spots, it's kind of tangled, and it isn't really the kind of piece where it's all about the solo line, but it's more about the texture, and the solo is kind of wrestling. It's kind of like a fever dream or something. You're kind of in and out of this scenario, and so and that was the difficulty when we did it, and even when I mixed it, it's like how much should Rich be in front, and to what degree should the background be in front, and what is really, where should that focus be? It's really interesting when you start analyzing stuff. If anybody in here is, you know,
I'm going to jump on you on this one, Maria.
yeah.
All right, when you play, it's performed live, how does it change?
Well, the timing can change because now I probably breathe the time a little bit more, and Frank and they do it differently every time. I mean, it always has that eerie feeling. It doesn't, that recording has a certain amount of reverb and stuff that sort of gives it this aura, so it never really captures quite that. But, you know, Rich changes it a lot from night to night, and so does Jay, and sometimes Clarence will really lay back and not play that much behind of it. Sometimes he'll really be in more. So, you know, all the music, I mean, this takes us to what we were talking about back there. One of the things I love and that I've come to really take for granted all these years is, you know, I'm a composer that writes very intricate music. You know, I don't write what they call charts, you know, and it's not like a blowing chart. You know, it's intricately written, but then there's these very important sections where the soloist has a lot of responsibility. You know, a lot of the pieces are through composed, where they start here and then they go to a whole new different section, and that soloist has to bring the piece to that section so it really launches into that. It's not just about showing how much they can play on the horn, you know? And so they have a lot of responsibility. And the rhythm section, and who's ever playing behind them, has a lot of responsibility to help support that and make that happen and switch up on a dime or throw in surprises on him so it's fresh for him every time he plays it. And at the end of a night, the joy for me is hearing and even watching them play, watching them smile at each other. I love it, like when there's a night where most of the band is kind of playing and busy playing when Rich does this, but when there's more open sections and Donnie McCaslin is just going to town or something, and you see everybody in the band and Clarence plays something unbelievable, and you see everybody look over there and kind of laugh, and you know, and everybody is so grooving on each other. You know, at the end of the night, I feel like I've just put on such a great party, you know? It's like watching your guests interact with each other and just enjoying each other so much, and I feel like, wow, you know, I was a good host. The first time I did my Dawn Upshaw music, the class.
You know, I'm sorry. I don't want to miss. We got to change the tape in a minute.
Oh.
So here, could we take a break?
Okay.
For a few minutes and then come back and
Okay.
and expand on this.
Okay.
Yeah, just don't wanna
Remind
miss
me, because
anything.
I'm going to forget what the heck I'm talking about.
Okay, so you were getting into the first time you wrote, getting into the Dawn Upshaw.
Okay,
music,
so the
right?
party and then Dawn Upshaw, and then
Yeah.
the party's over. Okay, so, okay.
Okay, good. So we're going to take just a few minutes here to change the tape, and we have another hour coming up of Maria.
Torture.
So, yeah, more torture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
vocalese on it. And yeah, because the poet that I used for this is a Brazilian poet. And his name's Carlos Drummond de Andrade. And the reason I used Drummond was, well, I love his poetry. And then I also felt that Brazil, and I have little bits of Brazilian influence in my music, not huge amounts, but little amounts. And I felt that that somehow was a good point at which I could find my way into the classical world, because Brazilian music somehow bridges something between classical and jazz harmony, and it has something that kind of falls in between, and so I thought that Brazilian thing would somehow be a bit of a bridge, you know. So that so it was kind of a little of my crutch maybe. But anyway, to finish the story, where I was going before when we started, was just to say that I was talking about how with my band, you know, it's like a party afterwards. Everybody's just appreciating each other, and I just sit back and watch it, you know. Maybe they say, wow, Maria, great piece if it's a new piece, you know, but after the first performance, it's all about each other. And I love that. So so we played this thing that you were hearing. We played it 3 nights in a row. And every night, everybody just tried to play it better, you know? And it was so lonely because there was none of that, man, great clarinet entrance there, man, you killed that, you know, or it was like nothing like that, you know? And I felt so guilty. It felt like it was just all about trying to play my music right.
So you're talking about, you know, the jazz band versus performance with the jazz band versus performance with the orchestra.
The classical
right?
performance experience, you know? So the next morning, Dawn was at breakfast, and this man who runs his name's Tom Morris, he runs the Ojai Festival, which is a festival that they have every year for, I guess 3 days out in Ojai, California. And every year they have a music director. This year it's Dawn Upshaw, a guest, and they pick interesting things to commission new music and just kind of come up with a concept for a festival. So the next morning they said, we want you to write another piece for Dawn for this festival. And we'd love to bring the whole band out and have your big band play too, but we want you to write a piece maybe for the Australian Chamber Orchestra and Dawn. And I said, okay. I said, already I know something. I said, the next time I write for you, Dawn, because she doesn't want to improvise at all. She's not used to that, and it's totally, you know, she wants to know how long each note is, where it cuts off, you know, how it's attacked, and do it the same every time. And I said, Dawn, I want to put improvisation around you, because I want you to know what it feels like to have it be different every single time. And I said, I know what's going to happen to you is if there's this malleable stuff going on behind you, you are naturally going to want to respond differently. You're not going to feel fenced in. As a matter of fact, it's just going to unleash something free in you. So I'm really excited about that piece, and that's happening in June. So out in Ojai, California. And what I did is I picked poems by this man, Ted Kuzer. Oh, he's a magnificent poet. And this book that I chose, it's called Winter Morning Walks. And he had cancer, and he couldn't be out in the light, and so he started going on these morning walks, but it was winter. And he was depressed, and he wasn't writing, and his good friend was Jim Harrison, so he started writing. At one point, he tried his hand at a poem in the morning, and it came. So he put it on a postcard, sent it to Jim, and wrote one every single day. So these poems are, and they're beautiful. Like one is, walking by flashlight at 6 in the morning, my circle of light on the gravel swinging side to side. Coyote, raccoon, field mouse, sparrow, each watching from darkness this man with the moon on a leash. You know, so it's like the metaphors that he throws in at the end, you know, the moon on a leash, you know, for a flashlight. It's like so beautiful. And there's one, my wife and I, and they're all so Midwestern, you know, he was from Iowa. Now he lives in Lincoln, Nebraska. So they all feel like home. He's from very close to where I'm from. One is, my wife and I walked the cold road in silence, asking for 30 more years. There's a pink and blue sunrise with an accent of red. A hunter's cap burns like a coal in the yellow-gray eye of the woods. You know, it's just beautiful imagery. And so I've written to 9 of these poems with Frank Kimbrough, with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, 6 violins, 2 violas, 2 cellos, and bass. Frank Kimbrough, Scott Robinson on clarinet and bass clarinet and alto clarinet, and then also Jay Anderson. With, I wouldn't call it jazz. It's not jazz language, but it's improvisation. It's music that you couldn't play if you weren't a jazz musician, you know. And I'm planning on recording it through ArtistShare.
Oh, wonderful. So
I'm planning on recording it, and I also want to record this piece with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. So my next recording project through ArtistShare will probably be this classical stuff, not my jazz band. So
now you mentioned ArtistShare. Do you mind if we take a slight departure from the music to ArtistShare? And maybe, as I mentioned earlier, she's one of the pioneers of releasing the music through this new kind of innovative, you know, way of presenting the music and through ArtistShare. So if you don't mind, could you talk a little bit about what is ArtistShare and how you got started with that?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't my idea. Everybody always thinks it's my idea, and then I'm like the innovator or something. I'm really not, but I'm the first musician who really used it and used it really successfully. Oops, I'm covering up your thing.
And the first one that won a Grammy Award on ArtistShare, right?
Yeah, and it was the first Grammy that was ever won by somebody selling only on the internet. That was pretty darn exciting.
Yes,
That
it
actually
is.
took down the website because it was so funny. When you win a Grammy, you go backstage and they actually, somebody there's, as soon as you walk away, they take your Grammy away from you. Well, we'll mail it to you and they shine it up for the next person, So it's
Yeah.
not your Grammy award. And
Yeah.
then you get shoveled to a back room. There's 2 rooms that you have to go to, and the first, they all have journalists in them. And so they're waiting for, I don't know,
50
Alicia
Cent,
Keys.
yeah.
They don't, I come up there and they're just like, yawn, who's this? Jazz. Yeah. So you stand there and, you try to, you don't want to be self-deprecating yet. You know that nobody's very excited about you and it's just blah, blah, blah. So I went in the first room and it was just, somebody asked me something because they felt sorry for me. And then I went in the second room, and there were more journalists in that one. And there was a guy there from Minneapolis. And he said, well, the people back in Minnesota, they're going to be really proud of you, and you must really feel happy about this. Because he was a Minnesotan, he threw me a bone, So I said, yeah. I said, I am really excited. I said, I'm really excited. I said, I'm pretty sure this is the first Grammy that was won by somebody only selling on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody said, is that true? And I said, I'm pretty sure it's true because I fact-checked it beforehand just in case. I said, there is no record of anybody winning a Grammy that only sold on the internet. All of a sudden, everybody was like,
What year is this?
What year was that? 2004?
2004?
2004, yeah, I think it was 2004. Or the Grammy was for 2004, but the awards might have been 2005. I can't, something like that.
Okay, right around there.
Right around there. And so, and I thought, that felt better. So, I stroked my ego for a second. What I didn't know is like, all of a sudden I went back to the hotel room that night, and I tried to get my website to come up, and the page wasn't going up, And then Brian, he came back, Brian, who runs Artist Share, he came back, he had 8,000 emails or something,
Wow.
He was like, oh my God, he said, the site crashed. He said, my servers weren't prepared for that, because it hit all over the news. And a friend wrote to me from Argentina, Maria, they're going to find you in the river. I don't like this, the record companies aren't going to like that you're changing the system, So, anyway, but the way it started was, I was doing stuff through record companies like you are, and like everybody did. And, my records were expensive to make, and I started investing in them because the budgets were too big and the record company didn't want to handle it. So I was paying for like a third of the record. I wasn't seeing my money really come back. They weren't cheating, I don't want to say that, but it was, what I realized is that the way they calculate recoupment, and when the money goes divvied up between the distributor and the record store and everything, there's nothing left for the artist because the record company's taken all this profit too. And what I really realized that I'll try to, because I explained it in the back, but I don't know if you got it. You looked sort of confused. But the way they
I'd like to hear it again.
Okay, the way they calculate recoupment is quite interesting. Almost all record companies calculate recoupment this way. They say to you, okay, use your record, it's $20,000 to make your record. Let's say we're going to give you a 20% royalty. And so that means, we're making about $5 a CD. So, because we're selling it, we have to pay the mechanical, and then we're selling it to the distributor for $6. So minus the mechanical royalty we're making $5. I'm picking round numbers. So in the end, they make a little bit more than that, and you would never probably get $1 royalty, but let's just say if you are, because it would probably be less. So say it's 20%, you get the deal of the century, and you're pretty excited. You're like, okay, so they're going to pay me my $1 a CD when upon recoupment of expenses. So you'd think if they're making $5 a CD, they got to make up $20,000. Okay, you got to sell 4,000 CDs. It's really hard to sell 4,000 now, but it wasn't that hard 15 years ago. So you have a pretty good chance of recouping. Wrong, because they calculate recoupment at your royalty rate, which means you have to sell 20,000 CDs before they pay you $1, which means 20,000 CDs at $5 a CD is $100,000 minus the $20,000 they spent on the record. They made an $80,000 profit, and now they're going to pay you $1. And they're going to be like, hey, we want to put on a really nice reception for you, and we're going to do this. And hey, can you show up for free and shake hands with everybody and be there and help out? And then they spend $1,000 on that reception. That goes on your bill, and then they calculate that, so they're making a profit on your little reception. You know what? It's like a credit card kind of thing. It's really bad deal for artists. But the good part for the artists is the reason they do it is they're taking the risk. You know, they're taking the financial risk. So for every record, okay, they made a lot of money on you, but they're losing like hell on him. No, I'm kidding. No, but they're losing like no, they're losing on other artists. You know, so they have to make that profit. So I don't mean to demonize them, but so you're paying basically to not have to take that risk yourself. So this was all going on, and then the file sharing was completely messing everybody up, and I was getting really frustrated with the whole situation. And when this friend, who is a musician but also a really good computer programmer and just has really great ideas always, he's just a font of new ideas. So he calls me up, I was in Europe, and he calls me on my cell and he said, Maria, I came up with an idea. And I said, okay, what's your big idea? He said, well, what's the one thing that nobody can file share? I said, I don't know. I don't know. This is 2002 when he called me. I said, I don't know. And he said, the creative process. And I'm like, okay. You know, I didn't get it. I mean, I was still at the point where I was thinking the internet is not really that big a deal. You know, I never believed in 1,000 years that people would ever really shop on the internet. You know, so I'm slow. So I'm not a person to innovate about stuff like this, you know. But he said, the creative process, what if I create a website where we announce ahead of time, I didn't even have a website at that point. He said, we announce ahead of time that you're going to make a record, and we're going to document through video and through audio and photo galleries and written journal entries or whatever, document the process of making the record so people will pre-order and then they can follow along, and we can have all different levels of participation for people. Offers for people who are composers, where I talk about, you know, how I compose the music. Things for improvisers, where I interview the guys in my band about how they approach solos, and maybe we got the idea to do music -1 versions of my music, put the soloists in a booth and then record a version with no solo so people can play along and, you know, and listen to Steve Wilson talk about how he approaches playing and learn something and try it. And so I have offers where you can play on every solo in my on a record of mine, you know. So it's something nobody in my band gets to do. So I said, well, this sounds pretty amazing. I mean, at first I was a little skeptical, and then I thought, you know what, I should just try this, you know. So we did it with Concert in the Garden, and we did bronze, silver, gold participants, and the first guy that came forward, I remember, it was like $1,000 gold participant or something. I was just in shock that somebody did that, you know? And he was a fan and really supportive and a really nice man. He still is part of these projects, and since then I've met him. He's great. He and his wife live in Chicago, and they love jazz, and, you know, they participate in all sorts of artist share projects now, and there are all sorts of people that have helped enormously that I'm very thankful to. And a lot of people just really loved, like when we won the Grammy, I got a lot of emails where people said, you know, I really felt like, you know, I feel proud of this, like I was a part of it. And that's what we wanted. We wanted everybody to feel, like we even did, when I made this record, I had this idea on here to put like names, and so here are names of guys in the band, but it's also people that helped make the record, but it's also names of like some of the big participants on it, all mixed together, kind of like to say, you know, we're all doing this together. Because honestly, I couldn't do this. This record was $170,000, in the end, I mean, it went a little over budget, I will admit. You know, I became a little obsessed with the mixing process. So, you know, it was the first mix stunk, right?
So do you?
He heard the first mix.
Oh yeah.
Somebody here heard the first mix, and so I decided to remix it, and you know, it was a lot of work.
So do you raise the money first before you begin the
Well,
project?
a good chunk of the money. I will admit, I took out some loans. I didn't get it all up front for
Oh,
this
okay.
one, but I got a huge chunk of it, enough to pay the band and the studio, and then where I really went over was, you know, so it's risky. I might have not made it, and then it would have been my butt in the line working my butt off to try to pay off those loans some other way. But I did eventually make it back. It didn't take that long to do it. I'll tell you what it does. It really raises the bar. You know, you don't want to disappoint people. Like, for instance, when we planned making this record, and it was Brian who said, like, we did two, we were planning on doing, I think I have one in here, the smaller version. Is there the thinner version of Sky Blue somewhere here? Maybe it was in the back. Anyway, we did like a smaller record cover, like thinner, you know, and then Brian said, what's something special we could do, you know, something, because all these people came on board early, and so I said, okay, we'll do like a special limited edition. So we did this thing with, you know, 2 booklets. Oops, one of them's missing, but one of them has like all sorts of photos from the recording session and little stories, and the other book has little pictures of the score. And so then I just announced to everybody, because you pre-ordered, we're going to give you the limited edition version, and everybody, 2 weeks from now, this one's $24.95 and the regular one is $18.95. You know, so we always try to do something that just gives a little more, you know, and makes people feel like it's worth it, because we don't want it to feel. I don't want it to feel like donations. Like, you know, it's. I mean, I guess, you know, the higher the offers go, there is that factor, because you can't possibly, you know, give something that's worth, you know, big amounts of money. But I want people to feel like they're really getting something for it, the experience, you know. That Kickstarter thing, I get so many emails, you know, support my project, and it's like, you know, I start to feel like, you know, it's like, gimme, 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 gimme. You know, you should support my project because you should support my music. And I feel like, no, you have to give something back, you know. I don't want people, I don't like that, what do you call that? Just purely the donation thing, you know. It's
Kind of like passing around a tip jar.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
kind of
you
thing.
know.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Concert in the Garden. So you only sold 10,000 of them?
yeah,
that was
yeah,
it?
we did a limited edition, and for me that was a mistake, because we're out of them now, and they sold out, and I could have sold a lot more.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just to clarify, not that only 10,000 people bought her CD, but you put a cap on it. Right?
We
Said
put a
after
cap. We said we're
10,000.
going to do a limited edition of the CD, because I didn't think I'd ever sell 10,000 of them on the internet. Well, I was wrong. I would sell a lot more. But the thing is I'll probably figure out some other way to bring that out, change the packaging. I don't know what the rules are. If you say something's a limited edition, you can't really say, well, oops, I changed my mind. I just realized I could make some money. And so, you know, but it's available now. We have little MP3 cards for it. But that's such a great sounding record. The MP3 doesn't sound as good as. But you know, more and more people just want an MP3. I do. I'm tired of plastic. Who's tired of who likes the package in here? Who likes packaging?
Oh, I love packaging. Yeah.
And who prefers an MP3? Oh, really? Okay, good. Excellent. Good to know. LP. Oh, yeah. Somebody just wrote to me and asked if I have my records on LP. I was just like, oh.
Hip now. It's coming back.
I almost got rid of my LPs, and then I didn't. I am so glad I didn't. I love playing them. There's nothing like an LP.
The sound of it, yeah.
Oh, the experience of it. You put it on, you look at it, you see the grooves, you know how long it is, you know where it's loud, soft, you can see it. You got one side that's one vibe, and then you flip it over, you got the other side that's the other vibe. One you like better than the other, and you just know that you're probably never going to play that other side. But the one, and it's a chewable bite. You know, it's not like go into a restaurant and they throw just a hunk of crap in front of you that you can possibly eat. That's what these are. Hunk of crap that you can't possibly eat. It's way too much. Does anybody agree? Okay, I'm sorry. Do you agree? No? I do. I'm overwhelmed. I'm choking in too much music, you know? There was something about when albums were harder to make and people made them less often and they took more care and we didn't have room for 5 billion of them on our shelf.
yeah.
And we listened to music. I went to Berkeley and I spoke to the students and I asked them, I said, how many of you in the last 2 months have sat down, just turned everything off, no computer, not multitasking, you're not doing dishes, you're not, talking to your friend on the phone, you're not walking around or jogging, that you just sit with the lights out or whatever and just listen to a whole CD. No hands went up. I'm like 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. 6 months, maybe a couple went up and they were teachers who were all in their 70s. You know what I mean? And I know I don't do it much anymore. But if I think back to when I was coming up and studying and learning and absorbing new music, it was a daily activity. I mean, okay, the dorm, we had the one, like I said, the one phone down at the end of the hall. Nobody had a computer. Nobody had a phone. What did you do in your room? You turned on your records and you listened or you read. It was different times. They were better. It takes so much courage to shut the stuff off.
Yes. Right.
To shut it off and leave space and give yourself space to. How many of you have had your computer break down and it feels really horrible in the beginning and then all of a sudden you realize your day just has more hours in it? It's like somebody gave you free hours and your life just felt significantly better.
That's right.
I mean, I call me old-fashioned, but I'm glad I'm not in, I'm glad I'm the age I am, I gotta say.
And so maybe a comparison would be, like you mentioned, you always physically write your music out, right? You don't use Sibelius
I
or
do,
Finale or
the
the computer notation programs, right?
Yeah, pencils and but I hire somebody else to put it in computer then.
Okay.
Because then I have to have it put it up on the website and everything, and then it's easy to edit and all that.
Oh, sure.
But my scores are all handwritten. I don't even know how to do it, and I'm not proud of that. It's just,
Yeah, there's all those steps in between, just the physicality of writing music out, can be compared to the physicality of putting an LP on a record player, like you
I
mentioned,
think
the whole
so.
experience of
Yeah,
it,
it's
right?
just, and also, I mean, for me, writing, it's like the way I work is I have a big board, and I put up these different ideas. I use huge pieces of score paper with no bar lines so that my music doesn't, because I feel like if you use a piece of paper that's this size, it's about the size of a 32-bar tune, and each line is about 4 bars long in length. It's like putting yourself in a jail cell. It's almost like putting a template in your brain and saying, now write a tune, and it's like somebody's just saying 32-bar tune, 4-bar phrases, or and then you feel like if you write a little variation on that, you've really stepped out. But if you write your music on a huge score with huge staves and no bar lines, it's like walking out in a field and dancing. You've got the room to make your music, and suddenly you realize the phrases are odd, and and the bars are odd, and then later you figure out the bars. But you write music. It's like so many people think of notation and then try to make the music fit into the notation. To me, we should conceive of the sound and then try to make the notation accommodate. Try to use it to best bring out the sound so that the sound in the end doesn't feel like bar, bar, bar. It's just music floating.
That's wonderful. I like that.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is if you use a computer, it's spitting out bar, bar, bar in front of you constantly. Sure. You can't do that. And also what I do then is I put these pieces of paper up with all the little sketches and ideas, and then I draw arrows. Oh, it's like putting a puzzle together and throwing down the pieces on the floor, and you find, okay, what do you look for first? Well, if there's just a few little red pieces, it's like, okay, that's a clue. And then corner piece, side pieces. You know, you try to find whatever limiting little elements you can to kind of get a picture of what you've got. And, you know, so I throw up my ideas like that, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, wow, this would connect to that. So I draw an arrow and tape this piece on here, and I could never do that if it was one bar and now the next bar and now the next bar. It's my brain would never work that way. I couldn't train it. If I'd started that way, maybe I could be very creative in that way, but I didn't start that way. So
You know, on that note, could we listen to just a few minutes of this first track I wanted to play?
yeah, I had
The
a second track.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one, I had gone to Peru, and there's this great kind of music I heard. I was working with Peruvian musicians, and it was a band of Peruvian musicians and American musicians, and they had taken me out to hear this thing called Landau, and Landau is, it's in 6/8, and it's got this rhythm they play on cajon, like boom, cha, say boom, cha, do, go, ga, don, cha, ga, don. Ja, ga, 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 da, ja, ga, da. So to me, that rhythm is here. But when I saw the people dancing, they were dancing to this. Ja, ga, da, ga, da, ga. Instead of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they were going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they were hearing this polyrhythm over it. And I was like, seeing these kids dance, I'm like, what the hell are they doing? You know, and then I started to see it, and they feel it that way. So I started listening to so much Landau, and then all of a sudden I ended up writing this piece that's kind of a multi-metered crazy Landau. So what it is like towards the end, for instance, there'll be 3 bars of 5/4. So 3 bars of 5/4 means 15 beats. And if you put that into eighth notes, that's 30 eighth notes. So you get 10 of these in 3 bars of 5 before you come down to 1. So I did that idea, but going over multimeters. So there's different grouping, whatever. It's
Now on finale, that you'd have to do a lot of clicks to get all the different meters, right? Click this.
you would have to get a lot of clicks to do, but if you use a pencil, you just go like that.
Yeah.
So we listened to a little bit of it. And Scott Robinson's playing clarinet. He's insane. He's just a crazy person. Do you guys know Scott Robinson, multi-instrumentalist? He's
Oh, he just played at the it's just a jazz museum event, right? The Ruba Museum. Yeah, last Friday. You were there?
was that the 3 bass saxes or something? Was it?
You said 2, right?
That's downright dangerous. To move them.
They had the right length.
The right what? Oh yeah.
Sure. Cool.
Now you'll hear that rhythm. But that's a 5/4 and a 4/4, which is 9 beats, 18 divisible by 6.
So how are the dancers feeling it?
In 12/8. It doesn't work throughout all of it because whenever you hear them clap, that's when it goes in. So it'll come up here. Well, this is easy because it's in 6/8.
Versace. Accordion.
Yeah, Gary Versace, and well,
Versace.
it's
That's
he
not-
says Versace, but it should be
Versace.
Versace. So he doesn't know how to say his own name.
So we just have
You-
a little
you
bit
can-
of time. So,
yeah, you
that
can-
is just so beautiful.
Yeah, that was insane to try that and to make Scott have to do that. But he does it great. And that was commissioned by the Los Angeles Philharmonic Association. So it was Diane Reeves together with Esa-Pekka Salonen, who was their conductor at the time. They commissioned that. So
Wow.
you know, so that was again one of those intimidating things. This is for like classical people. What are they going to think of this? You know, and I just have to kind of drop that paranoia because, you know, whatever. Well, thank you. You know, the thing about the classical world now is they so alienated their audiences with so much complex music that now they do come to people like me. It's like, okay, would you just give us a little tonality so we can keep our audience here? For, you know, we'll throw in something, but we needed something, you know, in case people don't like that or something. So, you know, I think they feel a little. It'll just be interesting to see how critics react to it. You know, classical critics, because generally I've been pretty lucky with critics, but in the classical world I may just like get slapped around really pretty hard. We'll see.
Well, you know, I had a couple of songs I wanted to play on my iPod, but I can't play them. But this song, not of your music, but of music that I just picked that I thought reminded me of maybe you have some influences from. I don't know if it's right or wrong. But
try
one
me.
piece, after listening to this, was Wayne Shorter's Serenata.
Oh
You know
yeah.
that piece?
Yeah, I know.
And the orchestration, the sound of it, the flow of it kind of reminded me. Wayne Shorter has been a...
Oh, I love Wayne Shorter. Yeah, I love Wayne Shorter, and actually he so you know how some people they say things that just affect you for a lifetime. The first time I met him was in Brazil, and we were all I was in bed with Ingrid. Well, not in bed with Ingrid. I was going to sleep with Ingrid.
Ingrid
Jensen. We were sharing a hotel room. My band had been there, and we stayed longer. And Terry Lynn Carrington calls, and we're already asleep, and she calls, "We're hanging down here with Wayne, and he wants you to come down and hang." And I was like, "Oh my God, okay, I think I got to get out of bed for this," you know. So I literally went down in my pajamas, you know. I was wearing sweats, and we went down, and there was a samba band playing, and I asked Wayne to dance, and he danced with me. That was like a high point of my life. But one thing he said, he was talking about Miles, and he said Miles used to say that he liked music that didn't sound like music. And I love that because I mean, in a way it's like, what does that mean? But you know how when music takes you someplace and you're not conscious. I think it's the thing I was talking about with the template. You're not conscious of it being music, but it is just something transformative or something that moves you or takes you, something you need, or you know, it's and that, you know, is what I'm always looking for. So like the influences that come in my music, it's not very often that I listen to something and I say, oh, I'm going to try to do something like that. Like even this piece, I didn't say, I'm going to try to write a landau. What happened is I just listened to so much landau that all of a sudden I was writing this thing for Scott, that harmony and those odd rhythms, and all of a sudden I started hearing this behind it, and I was like, oh my God, it's like this landau thing it's like an arm popping out of a tadpole, you know. It's like, oh my God, the landau is coming out of me. You know, it's like, it doesn't belong here. I'm not Peruvian, but I can't help it. Something weird is happening. So it's kind of like influences come into me like that. So whatever, it's kind of like, be careful of what you eat. Where we are what we eat. It's like, be careful what you listen to because it's going to come out in some kind of way, subconsciously. But yeah, Wayne Shorter is, you know, I love Wayne.
And I had another piece on there, Paco de Lucia, actually.
Well, that's big influence.
I noticed, yeah, especially the hand clap, the palm.
Palmas.
Palmas, yeah.
Yeah, well, and the first piece on, or the last piece on Concert in the Garden, the Bullerias, it's called Bulleria Soleá y Rumba. It's like a flamenco influence piece. I have to say, I probably spent more time, second place to listening to Gil Evans in my life would be Paco de Lucia. That album, Ziriad, oh my God. that the Bulleria rhythm. The first time I heard, does anybody in here ever listen to flamenco music? The first time I heard flamenco, I mean, I had just moved to my apartment on the west side. I walked by Lincoln Center, there was a sign, Paco de Lucia. I'm like, I think I've heard of him. I don't know. I'm going to buy a ticket. Just decided to buy a ticket on a whim. Sat by myself, and I was up in kind of the balcony, and the band was playing, and then this guy gets up from playing cajon. I didn't even know what a cajon was. The guy gets up and he starts dancing, and these rhythms were going on that felt sort of like they were in kind of 12 or something, but I wasn't sure. And this woman was next to me doing, and she'd do this stuff, and the music, it was like it was boiling, and then all of a sudden it would culminate on a beat, and then it would come down, you know, again. And so this woman was doing this stuff, and she'd leap out of her seat. It's like she knew when that was coming. And I was sitting there counting 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, and then she'd do it, and I was like, damn it, you know, and I couldn't get it. So I bought a record, went home, trying to count it, couldn't figure it out, and I'm like, this is ridiculous, you know? So I took a lesson with Jorge, Jordi Rossi, the drummer who plays with Brad Meldau, Jorge Rossi. I took a lesson with him on cajon, and I said, okay, explain the Bulleria to me. And then he explained how it worked. And it was like the light came on, and then I went home and I started to hear how the polyrhythms work and what the rhythm is doing. And I listened to flamenco music till, I mean, I have a hard time not writing Bulleria. As a matter of fact, in the Dawn Upshaw piece I wrote, there's Bulleria in the 4th movement. There's probably some kind of Bulleria on here, although I don't know where. I mean, there's Bulleria in everything I write now, almost. You know, I can't. Yeah, he's huge. That's a great album, Ziriab. If you guys don't have it, you'll love it. The singing and the rhythm.
Soulful.
And if you, he had a dancer with him. Oh shoot, what was his name? This dancer was so incredible. When he would get up from the cajon and dance at the end, by the end, the rhythm in his feet, and he'd be spinning and the sweat flying, and it was. I told so many people. I said to men, I said, you go, it'll change your sexual persuasion. I guarantee it. This man is so completely compelling. And I remember Miles Evans went, and a whole bunch of people, and they all agreed afterwards, you might be right about that, you know? I shouldn't have said that on here, but they didn't mean it.
And they're big guys, too, doing all these incredible moves.
Well, yeah, that guy wasn't, you know, it was so funny because he was so virile on stage, and then I met him. Afterwards, Pat Metheny was at the concert, and Gil Goldstein, and everybody cleared out, and it was left Pat and me and Gil and a few people, and they were going back, and they was like, come backstage, you can meet him. And I was like, oh my God, you know, I was so excited. But I was mostly excited to meet the dancer. What is his name? It's right here. And I met him, and it was like, hello. You know, I was like, oh, what? I'm like, what happened to you? Don't tell me. No, it can't be, you know? It's like, where's the Olay, you know? And then Pat Metheny told me that Paco said to him, I won't look at your wife in the eyes, because if she looks in my eyes, women who look in my eyes, they fall in love, and I'm not going to do that to you. Listen, you have to think that way to play that way. I tell you what. You know,
like
it's, you got to if you're going to have that in your music, you got to. You know, there's an upside and downside to everything. He's got the music, but then he's got that. You know, so it's like, but it works for him. You know, the women are falling at his feet everywhere he goes, I guess, apparently. I didn't look in his eyes. I didn't meet him. I didn't dare.
Well, there's one of, if you don't mind, we'll open it up to a couple questions.
Yes, please.
We have just a few minutes left. So, anybody have any questions? I know you do. Yes.
I have a question. You said you didn't write for vocalists. How did you take the turn that Carrie Marsh and Julia Dollison did by you doing your music on vertical voices? How did you take that?
Well, they asked me if they wanted to. They asked me if they could do it, and I said, okay. You know, but I was, and in the beginning I was like, I don't know about this. But then they sent me their first, you know, kind of mock-up of doing one. I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. So I said, I went with it, you know, and just said, go ahead. You know, I trust their musicianship, and it was pretty amazing what they did.
It was.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty neat how they got different colors. Because I thought, I don't know if this is going to work with, you know, one timbre of sound through all the music. Is it good? But they managed to kind of, with vowels and stuff, sort of change the colors and things, so some parts have a little more brassy sound or whatever, you know. But it worked. It worked. It's not something you could really pull off live, you know.
No.
They did it live at a gig, and that didn't work so well. It's really, you know, it's a recording project. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, when you were talking about the different rhythms, I mean, when you were describing it, you were dancing.
Yeah.
When you conduct, do you find yourself actually dancing?
Yeah, and also when I compose. It's the way I've tried to, because, you know, when you write, I don't know, how many people in here write music? Okay, so do you know how it is when you write and you spend a lot of time on a little section and you lose the sense of time, and then you hear it and it goes by so fast, and you just get really confused about how to create something that has the proper, to me, the hardest thing in writing music is the timing. You know, to me, I remember when I was at Eastman, one of the teachers said, what makes music good? And I mean, you know, some people might say rhythm. Well, you know, Messiaen doesn't really have rhythm, but it's beautiful. It's certainly good. You know, whether you like it or not is another thing. But my feeling was, you know, you have to grab a listener's attention some way. And you have to draw them through the piece with things that are inevitable. Either inevitable surprise or inevitable, you know, sumptuousness or inevitable, you know, goriness or whatever it is, but you have to draw somebody. You can't lose them. So when you're in your head and you're stuck there and you lose your sense of time because you spent 2 days voicing something that's 2 bars, how do you get out of it? So the way I get out of it is I record it into a little MP3 recorder, and then I get up and I dance, because my body tells me if a section needs to go on longer or if it's gone on too long. But if I'm sitting in a chair, it's two-dimensional. You know, dancing it's physical, and your body just says, no, I need more time for this or that. And I mean, I grew up dancing. I did ballet, I did tap, and I did figure skating. So it's like, for me, you know, the expression of music is, I love music that makes me feel like dancing. You know, I don't do this kind of dancing, you know. But it's like, you know, I like doing free. The neighbors in the back, you know, I have windows there, and they must just think I'm nuts, because I mean, I literally, you know, I do just like crazy things, you know, and you know, I'm like, I'm just like a complete weirdo, you know, when I'm writing music. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, I think we're just, oh, do you have a quick question?
Quick question about, you mentioned Ellington very early in your career.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's his birthday this April. Recently, have you heard or been influenced or include any of his?
Not recently. I mean, recently, I gotta be honest, I haven't listened to practically anything. Because when I'm writing music so intensively, I don't listen. I don't listen to music almost at all. I just want silence, you know, so not of late. I have to be honest, you know, of late, I haven't listened to that much jazz, you know. I go through periods sometimes where it'll be Brazilian, and then I'll go through a period where it's songs, you know, pop songs or something, and then I'll go through a period where it's classical, and then I'll go through a period where I pull out, you know, jazz that I listen to, and I go through these blocks. I'm like somebody who gets obsessed with one kind of food for a period of time, and then I get sick of it and I move on to the next. You know, it's kind of, and I'm kind of that way with music. So it's like something will strike me, I'll hear something, and then all of a sudden for 3 months, I'll pull out all my Ellington again. What's kind of fun is like when you haven't listened to something for a long time, like for, you know, some music for years, you know, and then all of a sudden you pull it out and you're like, oh my God, this shit is incredible, you know? It's like, and you can't possibly be listening to it all all the time. I mean, there's just so much music. And I think one of the struggles of being, I don't know if you feel this, for me, one of the struggles of being a composer is at this point in my life really having the time to listen and just sit back and enjoy music without feeling the pressure of, oh God, I should be writing. I need to write another piece for the band. I haven't written anything for the guys in ages, or I have to get that Dawn Upshaw thing done because what if, you know, the deadline's coming up, and, you know, I've constantly got this like thing, you know, on my back, you know, the pressure. And sometimes you just want to get off the train, you know, and just, I would love to just have a year where I just said, I'm not going to write anything. I'm just going to enjoy music the way I did when I was a kid. Back before I knew I was trying to make a living being a composer, you know? It's hard. It's not an easy way to make a living, I'll tell you. But yeah, I should pull out my old Ellington albums, for sure.
This
Very
is wonderful.
sweet.
We could go on for 2 months. Well, what do? You want to just stay? Maybe we should just all stay over. This is absolutely wonderful.
Well, thank you for coming, everybody.
Could you please, thank Maria Schneider. Yes.
And,
Wonderful.
and if you're not doing anything, May 13th, there are too many tickets left at Carnegie Hall, and it's $25. It's really pretty inexpensive. There might even be some seats cheaper than that, but they're so far away.
Jazz Standard tomorrow night.
Oh yeah, you know what? Let me just tell you about something, too, quickly. Tomorrow night at the Jazz Standard, they're doing Out of the Cool. I'm actually going out of town, so I'm not going to be there, unfortunately. But it's put together. I was telling you about the Gil Evans project. I want to tell you about something going on. This guy, his name's Ryan Truesdale. He works for me as he's a copyist for me, but he also co-produced my last 2 albums. He's really a pretty amazing guy. And I introduced him to the Evans family a few years ago. And he started helping them going through music and cataloging and stuff. He's found over 50 pieces of Gil Evans that have never been recorded. And then it put him on a kind of a track of going around and meeting people and talking with people. Gil had done 2 albums for Lucy Reed, one which was made and the other one which they never got around to making. And he talked to Lucy Reed's daughter or something. And then he met, you know, this person and that. I know the Teddy Charles thing has been part of this whole situation. I don't know who all he's talked to in that regard. And so he's doing an artist share project, and if you go to gilevansproject.com, he's doing basically what I did, but doing it with Gil Evans music and picking different pieces to record. And some of the stuff is this old Thornhill stuff that is so amazing. It is just insane music. One thing he did for the Benny Goodman band, was it Benny Goodman? Yeah. I don't know if he's going to record that. I mean, there's almost too much music. But anyway, he's putting together this project. He found all the old charts and put them all together to do Out of the Cool tomorrow night, so it should be really great. And there's really great people playing. I'm not even sure. A lot of guys from my band are on it. Clarence Penn is playing drums. I know Steve Wilson is playing. George Flynn is playing bass trombone. I think Howard Johnson is on it. Tim Hagens is playing trumpet. I forget. But anyway, it should be really interesting and really great. And I urge you to check out that project and to become a participant because it's pretty special. I became a bronze participant. Yeah, I'm excited about it. Yeah, because it's pretty amazing. I mean, you know, Gil died in 1988. And now here we are in 2012 finding all sorts of new music that is just so fresh. I mean, this music does not sound dated. It sounds fresh even today. It's just, and you listen to it and you just go, oh my God, it's what a gold mine.
Wow.
So yeah, so do check that out. Thank you, little Johnny.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Maria. All right, thank you all for coming.